Usually when we think about waiting for a catastrophe, right, there's like a natural, almost predictable buildup.
Yeah, like a crescendo.
Exactly. A crescendo that allows you to mentally prepare. The sky gets dark, the atmospheric pressure drops, the wind picks up, you can hear thunder rolling in the distance.
Right.
You have this intuitive biological sense that the storm is finally here. You brace yourself, you find shelter. There's a transition period where you can physically see the reality shifting from a state of, normalcy to a state of crisis.
Which is, that's exactly how human beings are wired to process trauma.
Yeah.
We look for the escalation. We look for the warning signs to kind of validate our panic. But when you step into the world of Genesis 7, that predictable natural transition is it's completely absent.
Oh, completely.
It is the absolute definition of an abrupt, terrifying paradigm shift. 1 second you're living in a world of blueprints, hammering wood, abstract warnings, right? And the very next second, a literal door slams shut.
Yeah, it's wild.
And an entire era of human history, complete with its, towering civilizations and supernatural chaos, is just over.
Over. The warning period expires, and the reality arrives with zero buffer. I am Daniel Moreau.
And I am Hannah Moreau, and we are brother and sister.
And this is Between the Verses, where curiosity meets scripture. Now, if you are joining us right now, this is actually part 4 of our second series.
Which is exciting.
Yeah, very. And I'll say this right up front. If you haven't listened to parts 1, 2, and 3, which covered the incredibly wild foundational narratives of Genesis 4, 5, and 6, please pause this and go back.
Definitely go back.
Furthermore, if you haven't listened to Series 1, just go listen to it. You will absolutely not regret it. It'll bring you completely up to speed on all the intricate themes we are building on today.
And all of those earlier deep dives are waiting for you on YouTube, Spotify, and now we are really excited to say Apple Podcasts.
Yes. Fine.
Right. And, just as a reminder, everything we discuss on this show, every debate, every rabbit hole, every note, it comes directly from our personal Bible reading and study. Our entire mission here is to make this text real in your life.
Right, to prove that this isn't just, a dusty anthology of ancient scrolls that somehow survived millennia by sheer luck.
Because frankly, the fact that these texts survived the rise and fall of countless empires is a miracle in itself.
Oh, absolutely. If that is not God's hand at work, preserving a message for us, we don't know what is.
We really don't. So today we are staring down the barrel of Genesis chapter 7, specifically the days immediately leading up to the flood. And, the structural challenge of this chapter is its density.
It is so dense.
Right. We are looking at roughly 100 years of human history compressed into a single fast-paced chapter. It reads so quickly that if you aren't paying close attention, you completely miss the sheer gravity of what is actually happening.
You just breeze right past it.
Exactly. So our mandate today is to radically, intentionally slow the narrative down. Genesis 6 was the architectural phase. God laid out the blueprint, explained the coming judgment, gave the instructions. Genesis 7 is the execution.
The reality of it.
Yeah, the ark is built. The waiting is over. We are transitioning from a century of preparation to the singular moment of no return.
So let's actually freeze right there on that concept of a century of preparation. Because I struggle with the physical or logistical reality of this.
Oh, it's mind-boggling.
It really is. We casually read the text and think God said, build a boat was built, it rained. But look at the chronological markers provided. The text clearly states that Noah was 500 years old when he became a father to his 3 sons, right? Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
Right.
And then just a few verses later, it explicitly states he was 600 years old when the floodwaters came upon the earth.
That gives us a window of up to 100 years. A whole century between the initial divine instructions, the felling of the first tree, and the final boarding process.
And that is exactly what I want to dissect. Think about what a 100-year project actually looks like in real life.
It's basically a multi-generational undertaking.
Yes. If a society started building a massive piece of infrastructure, like in the 1920s, and they were just putting the final coat of paint on it today, you are talking about a culturally defining undertaking. We're talking about something on the scale of a massive skyscraper or a suspension bridge, not just a fishing boat.
No, definitely not.
The sheer logistics, the resource management, the physical toll. How does a single family sustain the motivation, the physical labor, and, frankly, the economic funding to keep cutting wood and boiling pitch for a century?
Yeah, it's hard to even fathom.
all to prepare for a threat-like global cataclysmic rain that they have never even seen before.
Well, it requires a psychological endurance that is just entirely foreign to us. I mean, we live in a culture of instant feedback, right?
Oh, totally. We get frustrated if Amazon takes 2 days.
Exactly. We start a project and want to see results by the weekend. But Noah woke up every single morning for roughly 36,500 days and went to work on a structure that defied all contemporary logic.
Wow, 36,500 days.
Yeah. And consider the physical decay of the materials. Wood rots. Pitch degrades in the sun. If you are building a wooden vessel of that magnitude over a century, by the time you are framing the upper decks in year 80, the hull you laid in year 1 is potentially facing severe environmental wear.
Oh man, I didn't even think about that.
Right. You aren't just building, you are constantly maintaining and repairing an unfinished project.
Wait, that adds an entirely new layer of misery to the process?
Yeah.
You're literally patching the thing you haven't even finished using yet?
Yep.
And you were doing it in a deeply hostile environment.
Hmm.
Like Noah didn't construct this in a hidden warehouse somewhere. He was building an absolute behemoth out in the open, in front of an entirely corrupt, violent world. How was he not stopped?
That's a really good point.
I find it almost impossible to believe that local kings or whatever warlords were running the pre-flood civilization just kind of shrugged their shoulders and let this guy hoard massive amounts of timber for a century.
Well, that goes back to the social reality of the era. The text implies a world consumed by violence and corruption. Yet Noah possessed the means, the land, and the authority to see this through.
Right.
Perhaps he was a man of significant wealth or status before the command came. Or perhaps the sheer absurdity of the project served as its own protection, you know?
Like they didn't take him seriously enough to kill him.
Exactly. They might not have seen him as a threat, but rather as the village lunatic. Just this...
Which raises the immediate question. Were they triplets?
Yeah.
Because compressing 3 births into a single textual breath is just highly unusual.
It is unusual, and while we can't definitively say they were triplets biologically, they could have been born in very rapid succession. But the literary compression serves a specific purpose here. It emphasizes their collective identity. They act as a single unit in the narrative.
Ah, I see.
But contrast this specific family with our deep dive into the genealogies of Genesis 5. In those earlier generations, men were having children at 65, 90, 105 years old, and then going on to have massive, sprawling families.
Hundreds of years of kids.
Right. But by the time Noah is 600, his sons are grown, adult men. They are married. Yet, not a single one of their wives has had any children.
The contrast is just staggering.
Mm.
You have a world where people are supposedly multiplying rapidly, living for centuries, producing these massive, complex clans.
Yeah.
And then you have Noah's specific bloodline, which has essentially bottlenecked. There are exactly 8 people: Noah, his wife, the 3 sons, and their 3 wives. That is it.
Just 8.
A tiny, childless in the next generation family of 8 is standing on the precipice of becoming the exclusive genetic foundation for all future humanity.
And if you look at the logistical brilliance of that bottleneck, it actually reveals a profound mercy in the divine timing.
What do you mean?
Well, imagine if those 3 daughters-in-law had infants.
Oh, wow.
Imagine if there were toddlers running around a construction site for decades, or worse. Imagine trying to care for newborns in the pitch black, violently pitching hull of an ark while the world ends outside.
That would be a nightmare.
The trauma, the sanitary requirements, the emotional burden would have been unimaginably amplified. God preserves this highly specific, robust family structure, 8 fully capable working adults at the exact moment the world is about to be wiped clean.
That makes so much sense. But, you know, those 8 capable adults had to endure an excruciating social reality before any of that happened. We touched on this, but let's go deeper. Peter 2.5 calls Noah a preacher of righteousness. So he wasn't just quietly working on his boat. He was vocalizing the reason for the boat.
He was actively broadcasting the coming judgment. And remember, Noah had extended family. According to the genealogies, he had siblings.
Right.
He lived within a functioning, deeply entrenched society. He had cousins, former friends, merchants he traded with. For decades, he preaches about an impending cataclysm. And for decades, the sky remains perfectly blue.
Not a drop of rain.
The seasons turn, life goes on. The psychological toll of that, the relentless gaslighting from a society telling you that you are fundamentally insane, would break almost anyone.
Just imagine the mockery. You're wasting your life. You're depriving your sons of a normal future. And this connects so chillingly to how Jesus later frames this exact historical moment.
Oh, I love this connection.
When Jesus reflects on the days of Noah, He doesn't focus on the Nephilim, or the supernatural chaos, or even the extreme violence that Genesis 6 highlights. He says, as it was in the days of Noah, they were eating, drinking, marrying, and giving in marriage, up to the day Noah entered the ark.
He highlights the banality of their evil,
Yes.
the sheer blinding normalcy of it all.
Exactly. The terror wasn't just that people laughed at impending doom. The terror was that they were entirely absorbed by their daily routines. Normalcy was the trap. Absolute apathy was their undoing.
It's so true.
They had a colossal skyscraper-sized warning sign standing right in front of them, and they ignored it because they were too busy planning weddings and organizing dinners. They were aggressively committed to the status quo while the timer ticked down.
And that timer, it eventually shifts from a vague century-long horizon to an agonizingly specific countdown. In Genesis 7:4, God tells Noah, "For in 7 days I am going to make it rain on the earth."
Wow.
The century of labor abruptly narrows to a 1-week window.
Let's talk about the agonizing psychology of those 7 days. The ark is built, the pitch is dry, the food is loaded, you move your family inside, and then nothing.
Just silence.
You have to just sit there for a week. Imagine sitting on the tarmac in a commercial jet. The doors are armed, the seatbelt sign is eliminated, the pilot says we're ready for takeoff. But the plane just sits there for 7 full days.
And you can't get off.
And you were looking out the window, watching the baggage handlers drinking coffee, laughing and going about their day. That level of confined, suspended animation is what Noah's family endured.
Sitting in a giant, dark, wooden box on completely dry land, the tension inside that structure would have been suffocating.
Oh, I'd lose my mind.
The internal doubts that must have crept in. Did we mishear the voice of God? Did we just waste our entire lives? Are we the fools they say we are? And outside, the rest of humanity continues their oblivious routines, completely unaware that a cosmic timer has just hit the 1-week mark.
Yeah.
It is a terrifying period of divine grace, a final, silent week of suspended judgment.
But the silence of those 7 days was broken by something that must have shaken the ground. Because during that week, the most bizarre supernatural procession in the history of the planet takes place.
Animals.
The animals arrive, and this completely shatters our cultural Sunday school myth of everything just marching up the ramp 2 by 2, holding hands or whatever. The instructions God gives are highly categorized, and frankly, they introduce a massive chronological mystery.
Right, because the categorization is highly specific. God instructs Noah to take 7 pairs of every clean animal, 1 pair of every unclean animal, and 7 pairs of every flying creature.
Okay, stop right there. Clean and unclean animals. This is a massive theological anomaly.
It really is.
The rules detailing the complex differences between clean and unclean animals are codified in Leviticus, which is given to Moses centuries and centuries after the flood. How in the world does Noah know what a clean animal is before the Mosaic Law even exists?
Well, it forces us to recognize that the Mosaic Law wasn't always a spontaneous invention on Mount Sinai. It reveals that the knowledge of God's order, an understanding of what was pure, what was acceptable for sacrifice, and what was ritually clean, it existed in the ancient world long before Moses.
That's wild to think about.
It was a deeply ancient foundational reality that Noah was intimately familiar with. The law codified it for a nation later on, sure, but the principles of purity were already woven into the fabric of the patriarch's relationship with God.
But even understanding that, why the asymmetry? Like, why do you need 14 of a clean sheep, but only 2 of an unclean lizard? Why not just take 2 of everything to save space? The boat's already crowded.
It comes down to the biological mathematics of preservation, intertwined with ancient worship.
Okay, explain that.
Genesis 8 actually gives us the answer. When the waters finally recede and the family exits the ark, the very first thing Noah does is build an altar and offer burnt sacrifices to God, using some of the clean animals and clean birds.
Ah, I see where you're going. Because if he had only brought 2 sheep, 1 male, 1 female, and he sacrificed one of them in worship.
He would instantly cause the extinction of that entire species.
Wow. Yeah, the line would end right there on the altar.
Exactly. The mathematics of preservation demanded the 7s. By bringing 7 pairs, God ensures that Noah has a surplus available for immediate worship and sacrifice upon entering the new world, without devastating the fragile breeding populations required to reboot the Earth's ecosystems.
That is just. It's a profoundly practical command wrapped entirely in a theological requirement.
Right. It's a brilliant biological conservation.
It is. But I have to push back on the logistics of the gathering process, because this is where modern skeptics have an absolute field day. They picture a 600-year-old man traversing the globe. How did Noah hike to the Arctic to wrangle polar bears and then sail to Australia to capture kangaroos and keep them all alive on the walk back to the Middle East?
Which is a totally valid critique if you completely ignore what the text actually says.
Right.
The narrative explicitly removes Noah from the gathering process. It says, pairs of clean and unclean animals, of birds, and of all creatures that move along the ground came to Noah and entered the ark.
He didn't go get them.
No. He wasn't an ancient global zookeeper running around with a net and a tranquilizer dart. The mechanism of arrival was entirely passive on Noah's part.
So whether it was an unprecedented heightening of migration instincts or a direct, localized divine pull on their biology, the result is staggering.
Absolutely.
Just imagine the visual reality for the townspeople. You have mocked this man for a century, and suddenly, out of the tree line, this organized, eerily calm, incredibly specific parade of wildlife begins to march toward the structure. Apex predators walking alongside prey, sevens of the birds darkening the sky as they funnel into the door.
It would have been terrifying.
That had to be the first visible, undeniable proof to the surrounding culture that something supernatural was actually unfolding.
It was the physical manifestation of a century-old prophecy walking right up the ramp. God wasn't merely barking architectural orders from the heavens. He was actively orchestrating the event on a cellular, instinctual level across the animal kingdom. And once that procession concludes, once the 7 days are exhausted, we hit what might be the most chilling, definitive verse in the entire narrative. Genesis 7, verse 16, it details everyone entering, and then it concludes with a single haunting sentence. Then the Lord shut him in.
God shut the door.
Yes.
Why does the author make such a massive point of specifying who closed the door?
Well, consider the unimaginable psychological burden. If Noah is standing at the threshold of that massive doorway, looking out at his cousins, his extended family, the artisans he traded with, the people he has known for 6 centuries, could he have physically brought himself to pull that door closed?
Oh man, to actively choose to lock them out.
Precisely. And even if he could force himself to do it, imagine the lifelong trauma of hearing people outside pounding on the wood once the rain started and knowing he was the one who turned the latch.
That would destroy a person.
God removes that crushing moral and psychological burden entirely. God takes the final, definitive action. God executes the judgment.
That brings a profound moral relief to Noah. By shutting the door himself, God establishes a permanent, impenetrable dividing line. The era of grace, the century of warning, is unequivocally over.
It's done.
The ark is no longer a construction project. It is the absolute boundary between life and death. If you are inside, you live. If you are outside, your fate is sealed by the hand of the Creator. And the text doesn't treat this like a fairy tale either. It doesn't say once upon a time. It provides a shockingly precise timestamp.
Right. It reads like historical journalism or a ship's log. In the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 17th day of the 2nd month, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth and the floodgates of the heavens were opened.
It anchors the supernatural cataclysm in concrete history. It's demanding the reader acknowledge this happened on a specific Tuesday in a specific year. But let's look at the mechanics of the water itself. It wasn't just a severe monsoon. The language describes a two-front assault. The fountains of the great deep breaking open suggest massive subterranean upheaval. Tectonic plates fracturing, pressurized underground oceans exploding upwards, fracturing the Earth's crust.
It's violent.
And simultaneously, the floodgates of the heavens opening.
It is a total reversal of creation. If you go back to Genesis 1, God separates the waters above from the waters below to create a habitable space for humanity.
Right, the expanse.
Yeah, but in Genesis 7, he collapses those boundaries. The architecture of the ancient cosmos is essentially deconstructed.
And we desperately need to clarify the timeline of this water because popular culture gets this completely wrong.
Yeah.
Everyone knows the phrase 40 days and 40 nights. So the assumption is it rained for 40 days, the sun came out, the water quickly drained away, and everyone hopped off the boat.
Which is entirely disconnected from the text. The active torrential downpour, the violent cosmic weather event, lasted for 40 days and nights. But the text explicitly states that the waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days.
5 months.
5 months of total absolute submersion.
That is horrifying. The trauma of those 40 days would be deafening, feeling this colossal wooden structure violently tear away from the mud, pitching and rolling in the chaotic surf of a drowning planet.
And you can't see anything.
No. And then the rain finally stops. The clouds perhaps break. But you don't get to leave. You don't even see a mountain peak. You just float on a silent, dead, endless ocean for another 3.5 months. You are entirely at the mercy of the currents.
And the text notes the water rose 15 cubits, which is roughly 22 feet above the highest mountains of their known world. It was a complete erasure of the topography.
Nothing left.
And the result is stated with brutal clinical clarity. All flesh died that moved upon the earth. Every creeping thing, every bird, every human. Everything on dry land that had the breath of life in its nostrils perished.
Which leads my mind down a wildly fascinating avenue of speculation. If the text asserts that every land-dwelling creature with the breath of life outside the ark died, does that include what we now classify as prehistoric megafauna?
Ah, like dinosaurs.
Yeah. If dinosaurs or other massive creatures we only know from the fossil record were alive contemporaneously with humanity in the pre-flood world, is Genesis 7 describing the exact cataclysmic geological event that wiped them out?
Well, it is a completely legitimate question to raise from the text. Genesis does not provide us with a taxonomic list of extinct species, so we cannot definitively state which specific animals were eradicated.
Sure.
But biologically and textually speaking, if a species existed outside that wooden hull, it was permanently removed from the ecosystem. A global, violent flood involving tectonic upheaval and massive sedimentation is exactly the kind of event that creates expansive fossil records.
Right. Rapid burial in mud and water.
Exactly. Whatever walked the earth before the 17th day of the second month, if it wasn't on the manifest, it was buried.
So we know exactly what happened to all the physical, biological entities outside the ark. They drowned. The humans, the animals, the civilizations. But this brings us to an incredibly intense pivot.
A very dark pivot.
Because if you remember our deep dive into Genesis 6, the pre-flood world wasn't merely populated by corrupt humans and animals. It was heavily infected by supernatural chaos.
We spent an entire discussion dissecting the rebellious spiritual beings referred to as the sons of God and their physical hybrid offspring, the Nephilim.
Right. So if the flood covers the entire earth to purge this corruption, what happens to the supernatural elements? What happens to the fallen angels who initiated this rebellion, and what happens to their giant offspring?
Well, Genesis 7 gives us absolute deafening silence on this front. It tells us about the water, the ark, and the animals, and does not mention the spiritual fallout at all.
And because Genesis is silent, to understand how the ancient biblical writers and the ancient Jewish audience thought about this, we have to look to outside literature from that era.
Specifically, we look to the Book of Enoch.
Now, let's establish some clear boundaries here. We are not saying the Book of Enoch is the Bible. It is not part of the canonical scripture for most Jewish and Christian traditions today, though it is fully canonical in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church.
But even outside of canon, it is an incredibly vital ancient Jewish text. It was widely circulated and deeply respected in the first century. Both Jude and Peter directly quote from it or heavily reference its cosmological theology in the New Testament.
Right, so we use Enoch not to replace Genesis, but as an ancient lens. It helps us understand the cosmological worldview of the people who lived closest to the texts of Genesis 6 and 7. It answers the questions they were asking.
So putting on those ancient glasses, how does the Enochic framework resolve the silence of Genesis 7? What does it say happened when the waters rose?
Yeah, I'm genuinely curious how they explained it.
Well, Enoch provides a very sharp, crucial distinction between the two groups involved in the rebellion. The Watchers and the Nephilim.
Okay, lay it out for us.
The Watchers are the spiritual beings, the fallen angels, who descended, took human form, and interacted with humanity. According to Enoch, when the judgment of the flood arrived, these Watchers abandoned their physical earthly manifestations and attempted to return to the heavenly realm.
They tried to flee the consequences. Like, uh-oh, it's raining, time to go home. But God didn't just let them sneak back into the divine council after ruining the earth.
Precisely. They were intercepted. According to this ancient tradition, they were imprisoned. They were bound in the abyss, deep in darkness, awaiting a final future judgment. They are no longer permitted to roam freely among humanity.
Which perfectly aligns with what Peter and Jude write in the New Testament, right? About angels who sinned being cast into chains of gloomy darkness until the judgment.
Exactly. It's a direct parallel.
Okay, so that handles the fathers. The fallen angels are locked up. But what about their offspring? What about the Nephilim? Because they weren't fully spiritual beings, they were biological hybrids born to human women.
And that biological reality dictated their fate. Because they were physical beings breathing air, they suffered the exact same fate as the rest of corrupted humanity. Their physical bodies drowned in the floodwaters.
But I'm guessing that isn't the end of their story. Because they were part spiritual being, their existence didn't just terminate with their biological death.
Right. And this is where the Enochic worldview provides an answer to a question that has puzzled modern theologians for centuries. Where do demons come from?
Okay, this is the mind-blowing part.
Under this ancient framework, when the physical bodies of the Nephilim died in the flood, their spirits were not welcomed into the heavenly realm. Nor were they imprisoned in the abyss like their fathers. Because of their unnatural origin, their spirits were cursed to remain on the earth. They became disembodied, wandering entities, what Enoch explicitly calls evil spirits.
Wait, I really need to pause and highlight this because this completely upends modern assumptions. If you ask a random person in a church today what a demon is, they will almost universally say a demon is a fallen angel.
But according to the ancient Jewish framework that heavily influenced the New Testament writers, that conflation is fundamentally incorrect.
Yeah?
Fallen angels and demons are two entirely different categories of beings in this cosmology. Fallen angels, the Watchers, are currently locked up in a subterranean prison. Demons are the disembodied ghosts of the drowned Nephilim giants from Genesis 7.
That is absolutely mind-bending. Demons are literally the displaced, surviving spirits of the pre-flood hybrids, trapped on Earth, permanently deprived of a physical body.
Yes.
And when you take this Enochic framework and overlay it onto the New Testament, suddenly, so many bizarre moments in the Gospels make terrifying perfect sense.
Let's follow that thread. Think about how Jesus interacts with evil spirits. The most famous example is the man possessed by Legion in the region of the Gerasenes.
Right.
Jesus confronts this man, and the demons speak to him. They call themselves Legion because there are thousands of them in one man. But pay close attention to what they beg Jesus for.
They're absolutely terrified that Jesus is going to send them into the abyss, which, based on what we just discussed, would be the prison where their fathers, the Watchers, are locked up. They beg him not to send them there before the appointed time.
And what is their alternative request? They beg to be sent into a herd of pigs.
Which is so weird on the surface.
Right. Why would a powerful spiritual entity want to inhabit a pig? Because, as the disembodied spirits of physical beings whose bodies were destroyed in the flood, they possess a fundamental, ravenous craving for a physical vessel. The Enochic view explains their intense, almost pathetic desperation for a biological body, even if it's an unclean animal.
And it connects flawlessly to Matthew 12, too. Jesus gives this incredibly strange teaching where he describes an unclean spirit leaving a person. And what does he say the spirit does? It wanders through dry places, looking for rest and finding none. Dry places. Why would a spirit care about geography or water?
If you view it through the lens of Genesis 7, it clicks perfectly. The trauma of their origin is water. The flood is what violently destroyed their physical bodies and displaced them. They're the spirits of drowned hybrids. So they instinctively roam dry places, away from the waters of their judgment, restlessly seeking a new home.
It is genuinely fascinating how all these pieces fit together. We are taking the localized chaos of Genesis 6, filtering it through the ancient commentary of Enoch, passing it through the watery judgment of the flood, and watching the ripples of those events splash right up to the feet of Jesus in the Gospels.
It's all connected.
But this raises a massive, haunting question about the sheer volume of these entities. We discussed how Noah lived for 600 years before the flood, and the Watchers supposedly began the rebellion generations before that.
The textual traditions suggest this corruption spans centuries, potentially a millennium or more. It was a prolonged systemic integration into human society.
So if these Nephilim were being born, maturing, and potentially multiplying over generations, how many of them were roaming the earth by the time the floodwaters came?
We don't have a census, obviously, but if this activity persisted across multiple generations of sprawling ancient lifespans, we are potentially talking about a massive population, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of these hybrid beings.
And when the flood hits, every single one of those physical bodies dies, which means post-flood, you have this massive, unseen, generations-deep population of disembodied Nephilim spirits suddenly roaming the earth.
Yes.
And contrast that massive invisible population with the physical reality of the humans who survived. How many biological human beings step off the ark to face this haunted new world?
Exactly 8.
8 people.
Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their 3 wives. That is the entirety of the surviving human race.
It is staggering. Humanity was given immense freedom in the beginning. They had a pristine, highly resourced world. They corrupted it. The angels rebelled. The Nephilim walked the earth. Violence consumed everything. God judged it all with an overwhelming, catastrophic flood. And now, humanity hits the ultimate terrifying reset button with just one single family. 8 physical humans against an entire ruined, haunted planet.
It brings an incredible, crushing weight to their survival. Genesis 7 ends with a chilling, stark image. The waters prevailing, the mountains covered, the earth completely dead. It's a silent, watery graveyard spanning the entire globe.
It's the ultimate period at the end of a very tragic, very long sentence. But the beauty of Scripture is that the page always turns. As we bridge from the devastation of Genesis 7 into our next deep dive in Genesis 8, the active phase of judgment concludes, and we are met with arguably the most pivotal, beautiful phrase in the entire flood narrative.
But God remembered Noah.
That phrase changes the trajectory of human history. The judgment is over. Next time, we're going to watch those waters finally begin to recede. We will see the ark painfully scrape against the peaks of the Ararat mountain range and come to a rest. We will watch Noah send out the raven and the dove, testing the atmosphere of a newly emerged, incredibly fragile world.
Genesis 7 is the violent end of one paradigm, and Genesis 8 is the hopeful beginning of another.
But before we wrap up today, I want to leave you with one final, provocative thought to mull over. Something we haven't explicitly dug into yet, but something the reality of this text demands we consider. Think about the immense psychological and historical burden resting squarely on the shoulders of those 8 people inside that window box.
It is a psychological burden unlike any generation before or since has ever had to carry.
Exactly. They are the sole bridge between 2 entirely different versions of Earth. When that massive wooden door finally opens in Genesis 8 and they step out, they aren't just stepping into a new world of wet mud and empty landscapes. They are stepping into a silent universe where humanity's entire memory of the before is carried solely within their 8 minds. No one else remembers the bustling cities they grew up in. No one else remembers the ancient music that was played, the arts that were lost, the terrifying physical reality of the Nephilim. No libraries survived to teach it. How does one single family carry the traumatic memory of a dead, supernatural world into a completely empty new one without letting that trauma destroy the future? They are the solitary keepers of a deleted history.
It's an incredible, sobering thought to end on.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Genesis 7. We hope this has challenged you, stretched your perspective, and made the ancient text come alive in a new, profound way.
Keep exploring the text, keep asking hard questions, and we will see you next time.
Thank you for listening to Between the Verses. Have a great week.